Hello, and welcome to this month's Town Hall Live. So today we're talking about story structure, more specifically the 3-act structure. And I know that this is really important, especially for like new writers to kind of get a grasp of, because like we kind of all kind of subconsciously or unconsciously know how story structure works, but a lot of times it can be kind of hard to figure out how to put the puzzle pieces together and make sure that you have your pacing right and everything. So story structure really is a great basis to talk about. So we wanted to talk about it this month. We've got some fabulous people today, so we'll go through and introduce everybody. And why don't we start with Katie?
Hey guys, I am Katie Salidas. I am the author of 6 now, I think, different book series. I write urban fantasy and paranormal romance. I'm also the host and producer of the Spilling Ink Show, and I do publishing consulting with the Rising Sign Books.
Wonderful, and we're so happy to have you on here today. Everyone should know Joe, but Joe, do you want to say hi?
Hello, I'm Joe. This is my channel. Thanks for being here.
Love it. And we have the lovely Marissa FROSCH with us. I hope I said your name right. Do you want to introduce yourself?
You did. I'm Marissa FROSCH. I'm an author. I'm a story grid editor. I just launched a new pen name where I write pretty gritty romance under the name Angela Breen. So that's exciting. And as a story grid editor, this is kind of what I do. So that's fun.
And we're so happy to have you. And then, of course, we have Jim Nettles.
Thanks for letting me come play this evening. I'm Jim Nettles. As James P. McDonald and a couple of other names, I write science fiction, urban fantasy, a bit of horror, a little steampunk, dabbling in some other areas. As myself and a few other names, I write nonfiction about business, technology, futurism, stuff like that, including business essentials for writers. I am the founder for Author Essentials, which is an author education and author services company. And I am one of the founders for Con-tinual, the never-ending convention at continualconvention.com.
Wonderful. And I, of course, am Julia. I write as J.K. Allen, and I write primarily young adult urban fantasy, but I like to dabble in some other stuff. And yeah, I'll be your host for tonight. So we're going to start out with some, just really basically, like, what is story structure and why is it important?
What's a story structure? Oh, wait,
the 3-act structure. Yeah.
What's the story
why
structure?
Is structure important?
Wait, I'm pantsing. There's no structure. Oh, okay. I just get thrown out. It's story.
You just started off the biggest debate in the writing world. Pantsing or plotting.
Start small. Start small. Yeah. So I think the easiest way to look at 3-act structure is kind of the way that things happen. We look at the setup. What is our current state of things? What's our new normal? What's the problem that we're going to try to solve in the story? Then we have the story. We have, the drama, how are we getting there? And then, all the subplots and all the fun drama we get caught in the middle. And then we get down to the end of it, and it is, how do we resolve that story? So if you're used to looking at it, it's, what's my normal? How do we screw with the main character and other characters, and at the end of it, what's their new normal?
Yeah, that's a great way to break it down.
I like the part where you said you screw with the characters. That's it right there. That's the fun part, especially for authors, is throwing conflict at them and watching how your characters react. And that's the big bulk of the story, is getting your characters, to react to these problems, to grow, and to create that character arc that gets you from where they are to where they're going to be.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. We want, in the second part of the 3-act structure, there's that shift that goes from the character reacting to the character then acting and then making the decisions and starting problems for the antagonist rather than just waiting for stuff to happen. And I think that's a very important, like, evolving character arc that happens where they go from the just stuff is happening and I'm trying to adapt and deal with it in this new world that we're in. And then they go to, now I'm going to cause trouble too. I love that part. That's like my favorite stuff to write, is like that shift where they're like, okay, now it's my turn to put up a fight.
That's really important too. Because I wanted to bring that up when you sent us the outline, because a lot of authors have a problem with what we call saggy middle, where things get really boring, and what should be there is exactly that shift that's going to progress the story forward.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit more about that sagging middle, like the common problems that we find ourselves in when we're like in the middle of the book?
Yeah, I'm not sure how people end up there. It's not something that I've suffered with personally. I've just noticed it as I read books. And as I edit people's books, I've noticed for some reason it's like they know something needs to happen, but they get stuck in the reaction mode, I think. And
Right.
what you need is that progressive complication, or that little bit of chaos, we like to call it in StoryGrid, thrown at the character that causes them to have that mindset shift, where it's like, okay, whatever, you've pushed the buttons the right way, and now they're going to take charge and they're going to do something about it.
Right.
Sometimes that the saggy middle also comes in when new authors are writing stories. They have a tendency to over-explain everything and to go into the minutia instead of figuring out what is moving the story forward. And so they get into not only the B story, the subplots, but they focus on exactly every detail of what the character's doing, what the world looks like. And a lot of times when you're in that second act, you do need to pick up the pace a little, because yes, world building is important and character arcs are important, but if the story isn't moving forward, your readers will slow down with the story and eventually they just put the book aside, and you don't want that. So you have to focus on what is important, and then how is this pushing the story forward? What is the next goal? Where does this character need to be? And a lot of times they're not doing that. They're focusing so much on those little itty bitty details.
Mm.
Well, I think
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's also, I like that you said it happens a lot with new authors, because that's definitely the case. So if you are writing your first book, if you're working on that part, it's something to be, mindful of as you move forward. And if you, like, once you've written the book, if you're going back through and you're doing your revisions and you're noticing this saggy middle and you're like, okay, well, what did I do? That's kind of where you have to step back and really look at your story, look at where it's heading, and figure out exactly how to get your character there.
And writers have they have a hard time removing things from their story because they're so in love with their words. And it takes, really looking at it and going, is this scene necessary? Is this interaction pushing the story forward? If not, cut it.
Especially young writers tend to pontificate quite a bit.
Well, and I mean, I think that's the hardest thing for people to remember is sometimes you may have that beautiful scene, that beautiful phrase, something you want to use, but at the end of the day, everything needs to serve a purpose. Tight writing fundamentally gets down to, did it set up a character? Did it set something up? Did it create a resolution, or did it create conflict? Everything has to do something to move the story forward. And yeah, there's times that you can write some beautiful phrasing, and there are authors that are well known for writing huge, beautiful pontifications that have nothing to do with the story, but you can tell it was something that they wanted to keep. And as you can tell, my co-author here is a little impatient. But I think that's one of the hardest things is, and I sort of halfway joke, I am actually pretty well a plotter. I mean, I look at and structure things out, at least at some level, because it helps cut down on these sins that you commit along the way. But even if you are, if you're trying to deal with a saggy middle and you're not even sure what the problem is, a lot of the time then coming back and applying the tools of story structure, story beats, the rest of that, and applying that as a matrix on top of what you have will help you find those saggy middles. It'll help you find those places and those problems.
Exactly. And beats are something that you can think about even if you are a pantser. Katie always talks about her to-do list, which is a great way of looking at it. You don't have to necessarily outline and really like dig deep and get into the nitty-gritty details of what you're going to write if that's not your writing style or your writing process. But beats are something that you can be like, okay, I'm at the midpoint, so what do I need to do here? So why don't we talk a little bit about beats, and you guys can kind of explain what we mean when we say beats and what some of the big ones are.
Well, so I'll probably actually give a little bit of background. So a lot of the idea of story beats, one of the best resources you can go out there and pick up is Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. So even though it is structured towards screenplays, there's a lot of people that have adapted that to other forms of storytelling, novelizations and whatnot. But really what the story beats break down to are how do you set up each of your different 3 acts, because it is designed around a 3-act structure. It is designed to help you set up your characters, set up your conflict, and then set up your resolution even by act. So story beats are what we expect in a story, even though most consumers don't necessarily consciously know what they're expecting. They know that if a story doesn't hit certain beats, which is part of where that comes from, that if something feels wrong, something feels incomplete, something along those lines.
Right, it kind of throws off the whole pacing of everything, and we absorb 3-act structure in a lot of different media. In movies, my favorite example, if you're trying to think of like what is a 3-act structure, is The Hunger Games. She literally breaks it into Act 1, the reaping; Act 2, the Capitol; Act 3, the games. And so it's a really great example of how you can see like that first we have the hook, we have the introduction of the story problem, and then we have the big inciting incident in the first act. So that's all in the reaping. So we have, we see her going out and saying goodbye to Gale just in case he gets put in. And then we see, the big inciting incident where, her sister is picked and then she volunteers. So that's what throws the whole story and puts her on her journey throughout that she's going to go throughout the story. So, I know Katie has some great examples of movies that are in a 3-act structure. Do you want to share some of those?
Well, it works with almost anything, because the like he said, Blake Snyder's Save the Cat was originally meant for screenplay. It was easy to adapt to fiction, and what it does, it breaks the 3 acts in. So Act 1, what is supposed to happen in Act 1? You have some specific beats. You're going to introduce your character. You're going to do your, I think they call it the opening snapshot. That just means, what does the character's current world look like now? Okay. After that, you've got to set up what the problem is going to be. Once you've set up the problem, the character has to make a choice. So these individual line items become those beats that you're aiming for. And then you move into Act 2. And Act 2 is going to be where you add your rising action in. So you need to show the character having different points of conflict. You need to show the character making choices, whether to move forward. You need to show how the characters are interacting with each other. You need to show some of the failures. So again, little points that you need to try and hit. And that helps people when they're plotting, even if they're pantsers. You can do like the to-do list method like I do, where I just write a single line for each group and go, this is what I want to do. But if you fill in a beat sheet, it gives you a mini outline. And it does break it down into those 3 acts. So you know what is expected in those specific acts.
There was a famous screenwriting teacher named Robert McKee who challenges anybody. The very first thing he asks every person to do is come up with a movie they think doesn't fit the 3-act structure, and he'll prove to them how it is in the 3-act structure. And oftentimes there's 2 examples that he gets every time, and that's Pulp Fiction and Memento. And he can break those down completely into 3-act structure because they do follow the 3-act structure. Just as Katie said, with Pulp Fiction, you get the introduction to look at it, go back and watch it. You'll get the introduction to every single character that is involved in the action. That's why it skips around, is because you've got different characters that have to be introduced, and they all lead to the end game. But the way that the beats go in Pulp Fiction, it's leading one thing to another thing to another thing that solves and resolves the conflict at the end. And Memento is basically because of the point of view of the character that is involved, you're at the beginning of his journey, just like anything else. He does this exploratory monologue at the very beginning where he tells you exactly where he's at the moment that the movie starts and how he got there. And what goes forward is, from that point forward, is the present day. So it follows all the beats. And so he's never been disproven. People have thrown anything at him, and he can give you the 3-act structure. It's amazing. I know that doesn't help anybody here, but I'm just saying.
The classic one that I think everyone goes to is Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
That is the perfect 3-act structure model right there.
But the other thing about it's not only Star Wars the film, it's also the trilogy. Because you can look at that as being Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 in terms of the trilogy. I'm talking about the real trilogy, not the others that don't count. But
right, and so when you're a plotter, you can then go into your series and do an overall 3-act structure, and you can get if you're a plotter, you can get really into like the nitty gritty of all these like little details.
Even like Jim said, if you're a pantser, you can come back after you've written your first draft and line your story up against the beats and see if you've hit your marks.
Yes, I always recommend, as an editor, I say, like, if you can't bring yourself to make an outline, like, do it after you have told yourself the story and done that 0 draft. Make a quick outline, see what you're missing and see what you have too much of, and balance it out. Mm-hmm. That's really, really helpful for the editing process.
And going back to that idea of the saggy middle, because to me, the two most critical parts, if you look at the story beats, are what are called All Is Lost and The Dark Night of the Soul. And those two pieces right there are the core of your story. They're the heart of your story, because that's the point where the main character realizes, this is where I screwed up. This is what I should have had. This is what I should have done. And now it's gone. And I don't know what my new normal is. That's the pivot point that you go from on the defensive to where you're now being proactive. This is where you've gone from being that point of being reactive to proactive. And this is creating that scenario. So everything in the first half leading up to that Dark Night of the Soul has to set that point up where you realize there's value in that. And if you blow that part, that's where you lose a lot of people. And then it's the Dark Night of the Soul, which is then sets up the creation and the energy to then give them the motivation to go back and try to recover and get that next phase.
So real quick, let's talk about the Dark Night of the Soul. Is actually one of my favorite beats ever. But basically what it is, if and correct me if I'm explaining this weirdly, but you have this moment where the protagonist tries and fails against the antagonist or whatever. They try to fix a story problem, and they have that Dark Night of the Soul where they're like, I failed, I can't do it, there's not enough in me, right before they have that kind of transformative Phoenix moment, and like they take everything that they've learned on the journey and everything that they've kind of gone through, and they find deep within themselves the ability to do it, So I kind of love that, like that melancholy, soul-searching, dark moment of a beat myself. But like, what are your guys' favorite beats?
Just to add to that, I wanted to say that StoryGrid has some different terminology. So if anybody leaves this and goes and checks out StoryGrid, you're going to notice different names for things. And for that, we call it the all is lost moment. And I just wanted to say that because when you hear, what did you call it? Dark Night of the Soul, it sounds like kind of fantastical, and it doesn't have to be. This applies to everything, romance. Oh my gosh, my brain just like stopped. The stories where worldview maturation stories, that's what they're called. YA, everything. So I just wanted to give it another name and make sure everybody knew that this does apply to you regardless of genre.
Right, this is not just fantasy or sci-fi or any like big space opera or anything. Yeah, this can definitely, like contemporary romance, when you have the couple that they have that insurmountable obstacle and they break up and you think everything's lost. Like it's that kind of moment. Yeah, exactly.
Well, And one of the things that I think has been done very well is there's been adaptations of this model to pretty much every genre. And so you can find, and they'll use different terminology for different phases, but you'll see that there's similarity there. The question sometimes is how high are your highs and how low are your lows, is what a lot of that dives into, is what it is. But again, it's still the phase of you've got to set up the problem, create the problem, and then allow them to find their solution.
Right. That makes me think of a really good point, though. When you are working on a series, you have to keep in mind that each book should escalate and get bigger and bigger as far as tension, as far as stakes, as far as conflict. So when you think about how high your highs are and how low your lows are, keep in mind in the series, they've got to keep getting bigger and bigger, like to have that really impactful, really great series.
The risks have to escalate.
Exactly. The stakes have to get higher for sure. Any other beats that you guys like absolutely love? Oh, Joe, you have a question? You're muted,
And
Joe.
Joe's on mute.
Hi, my name is Joe Compton, and I have a question for the group.
Yeah.
How do you get started with the act structure? What's the best way to get started? Is it to write everything down and then put it together? Is it where would you recommend starting when you get going with the process?
That's a trick question, Joe, and you know it.
I think everyone's going to have a different answer. So, Marissa, do you want to start, and we'll get everyone's answer?
Sure. I was going to start with, you need to kind of take a step back. First of all, you should read a book, either John McKee's or Save the Cat or Story Grid or something like that, to kind of give you the background knowledge of it. And then my first step would be to find books and movies in my genre and look at them and look for those story beats, because along with the story beats that are universal, regardless of genre, there's also obligatory zines and conventions that are required for your genre that you need to be aware of, and where they're located within the 3-act structure. So that's something else that I think is really important. Also, though, this is one of those things where it's like, if you're a pantser, don't listen to this and think, oh, that's not for me. Like we said, you can go back. Once you know how this works, you can go back to that zero draft and apply it kind of like a map over it, to find your way in the revision stage to make sure that your story works. Because at the end of the day, when someone finishes your book, you want them to feel satisfied and you want them to go looking for your next book. And if you don't have, if this isn't in place, if this framework isn't in place, they're not going to be satisfied, and they're either not going to finish the book or they're not going to come back, which are two things that we're trying to avoid by using this.
Great answer. Katie, do you have one?
I have to second what she said about, if you're a pantser, you're going to do it differently than if you're a plotter. And a lot of new authors don't know what kind of writer they are when they start. When I started writing my very first book, it took me 5 years because I thought you had to plot everything out and get all the details done. And I lost interest in the book because that's not my style of writing. By the time I threw the plot out the window and just let myself free write, I was able to finish the book and then go back and learn what I was supposed to do. And it's a backwards way of learning it. But if you're a pantser and you really can't write to a hard outline, you've got to just sit down and write. Get the story out of your head first and then fix it.
Right. Good writing is rewriting in many ways. And
there will be many rewrites as you learn. And your style will also change as you continue to write too.
Definitely.
Most people, when they write their first book, write completely differently by the time they're at their 5th, 6th, or 7th book, because they've learned different things, and some things are more intuitive. So it's really kind of trial and error. But the Save the Cat, the beat sheets, those are great tools that you can apply if that's the kind of writer that you're leaning towards.
Yeah, and exactly like Marissa said, you can apply it afterwards retrospectively and say like, okay, I don't have this beat here, and that's why I felt something was missing in the middle. So what can we slot in to this puzzle piece? Jim?
So because I do everything from very short flash up to, known killer novels and novellas and everything in between, it's kind of different depending on how long a piece I'm writing.
Mm.
But usually one of the things I'll start with, I'm working on something that's at least novella length, if not novel length. I will actually, to get the pantser part of me out of the way, I will write a short story. I'll just sit down and blow out a short story or something like that lets me explore the world, the characters. That doesn't necessarily have to make sense. It doesn't necessarily have to follow structure, as long as I can create enough conflict to figure out who they are. Then I can carry that forward and start to actually outline and say, here's my structure, here's what I'm trying to do. Because like many writers, I started as a full-blown pantser. I'm just going to sit here and blow this thing out the door.
Mm.
And occasionally I'll still just do that, and it's line of consciousness. But even after you've done stuff for a while, subconsciously you know and recognize what the ebbs and flows are of the story have to be, or otherwise you recognize what's missing. But I think that's the thing, is just write until you kind of get things clear in your head. But I'll do that, and then I can sit down and outline what the story is, because then I've gotten some of the stuff out of my head that would be the normal things that you want to do, which are to explore the character, listen to the voices in your head, explore the conflict. And that's where you get those nice little surprises in that phase that you can actually then plan to incorporate them into the story.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like I was saying, structure is something that we kind of all subconsciously have absorbed. If you've read movies, or if you've read books and you've watched movies, then you kind of know, like, okay, we're coming up to like a tension point, we're going to hit a crisis and something is going to happen to the character. We feel those beats coming. So it's something that like you don't necessarily have to plot out in advance, because you kind of know, okay, here something has to happen to the character and we got to torture them a little bit. What I would say when you're getting started with the 3-act structure is, first of all, understand the breakdown of the structure, as in it's the first 25% of the story is the first act, the second act is the next 50, and the third act is the last 25%. So the sagging middle is actually most of the book, because it's a good 50% of the book. But like we said, we have that shift from the character reacting to things happening as they're learning what this new world looks like and how things are going to happen, to acting. So if we look back at the Hunger Games, first we have Katniss just reacting to everything. Someone's trying to kill her, so she runs and she does this, or she cuts the wasp jackets out of the tree, and then we have her finally acting and saying, okay, now I have a plan. I'm going to take the food away from the Capitol people, and she goes into action mode where she's deciding, she's making decisions, and she's doing things. So that's really important to keep in mind. And then also kind of look at it like a road trip. If you're a pantser and you're like, I don't know much, but I know I'm going to stop in Vegas on the way to California, then you have your inciting incident, but you may not know every single beat, but you've got a good idea of like where you're going in the end. You at least know you're going to California, so you might know just a couple things along the way, but afterwards you can look at it and say, did I hit my midpoint? Did I get that switch from reacting to acting? And did I get, all is lost moment? You can make sure you're hitting all those beats afterwards.
That's where the to-do list method, is what I call it, comes into play, where I at the beginning of writing, I have the idea for the story, and I kind of know where it needs to go and where it needs to start. And I just write down basically the character's goals. What do I want them to do in this story? So I get a list of things that I hope to have in the story. Wherever they fit in the plot is wherever they fit in the plot. It's not nothing's linear when I do the to-do list. But I go and I check it off as I'm writing it. Did I hit this part? Did I hit this part? And then at the end, when I go through revisions, that's when I start looking at whether the structure actually makes sense, and if I've missed something, if I need to add something. And oftentimes I do need to go in and insert chapters because I might have missed something that I needed to expand on, because otherwise, other than the saggy middle, I tend to have too fast second acts because I'm constantly pushing that plot forward as fast as possible. I forget to come back and do some of the B story and some of the extra world building. So I end up adding after my first draft a lot of the times.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about B story in a second, but that is a great point. And thinking of it as goals. What goals do I have as a character, and what goals do I have as an author? Make a to-do list out of that. But you were talking about B plot and subplots. I know we kind of been saying that over and over again. The biggest subplot is, of course, the romance subplot, the romantic interest. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about subplots for a minute? Any tips or,
Well, one of the biggest sins I see from a subplot perspective often is somebody had to come up with a subplot, so they created a narrative to fill out Act 2. And instead of really having the subplot have a real impact on the main plot, it was just, well, I need to have this, or I want to have this part of the relationship. The question is, how well do those subplots tie into the main plot, have an impact? And a lot of the time, you see that either creates the success or the failure of a book, especially if you're talking about romantic interests. And if you're writing a series where you've got two characters that are, is it will they, won't they sort of thing. So if you look at something like Castle, if you look at something like even going back to Moonlighting, look at the X-Files, with that will they, won't they part of the relationship, that often runs as the lower end subplot that fuels the conflict in the personal relationship. But if it's just creating that structure, but that's, if we talk about the romantic relationship there, a lot of the time that's what can create the bonds between primary characters or create the strife between primary characters.
Do you want to explain what you mean a little bit by that before we get to everyone else?
Sure. So if you think about it, if you think about romance, where if you've got two people that are forged, so just let's go with something that's a little bit more adventurous, where there's actual mortal danger or something like that, where you've got 2 or 3 or 4 characters that are having to work in concert to survive something or achieve a goal or whatever the case may be, where everybody's working towards that. Well, as personal relationships form naturally, there's going to be people that like each other, don't like each other. There's going to be personality quirks, things that rub on each other. So, it could be that 2 people are the best of friends, but somebody has that personal quirk that it just annoys the hell out of their best friend or their spouse or the person that they're romantically interested in, if that's part of what the bonding is going on. Mm-hmm. So if you're writing romance, it could be that the romance buds because the 2 of them are forced to work together for something.
Right.
And that tension creates the conflict. And so the romance is the subplot, but that's where a lot of the conflict comes, and they're like, we need to stop and talk about this right now. Yeah, I know that monster is coming, but they're going to wait. We're talking about this right now.
I agree with that, but to even put it in more simplistic terms, it's the character development, because your story focuses on your hero and your villain typically, or if a romance, the 2 people who are eventually going to fall in love. But there are other characters in the story, and they all play a part in your 2 primary characters' lives. And that subplot or that B story is giving them more depth and making them more real by showing what's happening alongside of what's going on in the main plot and how they fit into the story.
Right, and a lot of times they can act as kind of like a mirror to the main character. So if you're writing a story where maybe the theme of the story is kind of believing in yourself, if we're talking about like a young adult story or something like that, so you're supposed to believe in yourself, you might have a secondary character that is maybe like too arrogant. And so they work as a foil to like kind of be like, this is what you don't want to be as you're believing in yourself, though you don't want to take it too far. So you can have kind of like that mirror character that says, here's the flip side of the theme, and kind of like what to watch out for in a way.
Yeah.
Marissa, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to add.
Does that. They create the problem that exists between the 2 primary characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add, it's all good. I just want to add that, because you guys seem to have covered that really well. So a tool that people can use if you are specifically looking at your subplot while revising is actually reading the story backwards, because you can see if you didn't pay things off, and you can also see if you could have like put little things in to make the story pay off better.
Like little details of foreshadowing and stuff. Oh,
Because
that's a really good tip.
That's you know, because I'm a plotter kind of to the max. I have this like intense blueprint. Everything is kind of chosen out ahead of time, and I just kind of write in 5-minute sections. But even during those 5-minute sections, I have moments where I'm like, oh, if I do this, it's going to be really cool, that I forget about later.
Oh,
so
yes,
after
definitely.
my draft is done, I have to read it backwards and be like, oops, forgot to pay that off. Oops, forgot to pay that off. So I can go back in and fill it out.
I forget stuff as I'm writing it.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else is like me, but I'll be like in the middle of something, like, oh, detail for later to like get in, and then I'll be like, huh? I already forgot.
You put it in, but you put it in a note, but it's too vague, and you're like, what does that mean?
Oh my God, yes. I took a note before, and it was like weaponized hands, and I was like, what the heck does that mean? It was such a cool idea, but like
Weaponized hands?
Yeah. That was my note, and I had to figure it out. Yeah.
That's okay. I think one of the notes I had was Vampire Viagra. Yeah. That was fun when I read that one later. I'm like, what did I mean by this?
Exactly. Yeah.
The fangs needed a little bit of support.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, so I think one important thing to say about subplots is to remember that it doesn't have to be romantic subplots. There are so many other stories that you can tell. And I mean, I write young adult primarily, so of course mine are usually have like a romantic subplot. Sometimes the secondary characters have a romantic subplot and all that stuff going on. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I feel like a lot of people kind of feel like they have to force romance into their story when it necessarily isn't the best fit.
Back to Star Wars.
Yep. It is a classic outline. Like, they did it perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Katie kind of stole my thunder a little bit when she piped in about leading one subplot into the storyline. There's this book out there. I don't know if a lot of people know about it, but it's called Amongst the Killing. It's written by this guy. I don't know, some guy named Joe Compton. I don't know who he is.
yeah.
I know that guy.
Right?
That name sounds familiar.
That guy, right? It's that guy that everybody knows, but they don't know his name.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite devices, is to take the subplot, the underlying subplot, and kind of make it so, because like then you have the conflict in the second act, right? So part of the resolve for me in the second act and to the third act is to take that subplot and blend it into the back end of the second act to kind of kickstart the third act resolve and give it that little bit of touch, because the person on the outside is the person that is observing what's going on in this world, and they're able to see what the detective couldn't see, and when they mention it, it just kickstarts the whole third act. And it's kind of the kind of thing I like. It's one of those little tricks that I like to use. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. I love the stories that do that, especially like mysteries or like thrillers, where it's just like you have the two threads that seem separate, and then all of a sudden they connect, and then the climax happens, and it just jumping off point for like the big action scenes and stuff. That's really exciting when that happens.
Well, and I think that's an important piece too, is how you structure this a lot of the time depends on the point of view you're using. If you're using a first person point of view versus third person, or even if you're getting into a third person omniscient, is how you can weave those threads and how those subplots work into the story. And how you can, give the red herrings or give the lead that says, it looks like it's going this way. Is it really going that way? And create the mystery, because at the end of the day, you want the reader to feel smart. You want them to say, oh, I saw this piece coming. You want them to feel like they knew the story, instead of, oh, here's the big surprise in the punchline. You want them to feel like they were living the story and watching and knowing it was what was coming. And
you want that click to make sense in the end without them guessing it before it happens. Yeah.
Right. Your seeding needs to be good enough so that they go and say, I should have seen that coming.
I
Well,
love
even if
it when that happens.
The Scooby-Doo ending.
even if it gets it though, I mean, if it, for me, because you can't, I do a lot of movies where like halfway through or even probably at the end of the first act, I've figured it all out. And it really pisses a lot of people off. I'm not, nobody wants to go to the movies with me anymore after they go the first time. So because I can just do it. And it's just
I do that too.
I know story so well, and so what happens is I just know how it's gonna go. But if it's done well, it doesn't mean I hate it. It's just
still
right.
Yeah.
Did I enjoy the characters? Did I enjoy the ride?
Sometimes sometimes the obvious conclusion is the right conclusion, and moving it towards direction is the absolute direction you have to go. Otherwise, you'll be like, it'll be, oh, he woke up and it's all a dream. What the, I mean,
right.
If your goal is to completely try to fool everybody, you're not really writing a story anyway. You're
right. Yeah, totally valid point.
Although in mysteries, you do want it to be harder to figure out than maybe other stories. I know in my agent series, a lot of times I don't want the readers to be able to figure out who the bad guy is. And so as I'm writing it and as I'm sending it out to my beta readers, I'll ask them, what do you think? Do you have any, suspects? What's giving this away? And when they get to the end, did you figure it out? Was it satisfying when you learned who the villain was? Because I want to make sure that I'm testing it out on readers and that it's not so blatantly obvious, because I want it to be that good surprise at the end.
Still that's following the structure though. That's not just out of the blue deciding that it was all a dream. But,
No.
It's all a dream doesn't even cut it. Like, I just read this romantic suspense novel. I write romantic suspense, so I was reading them, and this one is hugely popular. And the whole time I couldn't figure out who it was, which doesn't happen to me. I always know who it is. And then at the end, who it was so unimportant and unrealistic that I was pissed off.
Yeah.
When I finished the book, I was like, what happened?
Let's count to 3 and say the name of the book at the same time, because I guarantee you it's the book that I read. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think you read this one.
If it's Girl on a Train, yes, I have, because that one was terrible.
No, I didn't read Girl on a Train. I didn't read Girl on a Train.
But yeah, anyway,
I
didn't mean to out that author. I apologize to that author, but
yeah,
it's got to be a satisfying end. It can't just be a random, person that was never really important throughout the story. It's got to be somebody who's going to make an impact when they go, oh, that's who did it.
You don't want it to be the guy in the red hat that was on page 30 and you never heard from again.
It wasn't even that. It ended up being the dad of a character who you never saw.
Oh no, that would be super frustrating. Yeah, because you need the foreshadowing and you need those little clues dropped in so that everything clicks into place.
Well,
and
that's all part of the structure too, right?
That's part of the mystery thriller structure. So if you write mystery thrillers, pay attention. This is important.
And don't have a random B character do it.
Yeah, and I mean, Knives Out did a good job of that. It walked you straight through the story structure. There was no surprise to it when you got down to the end. They told you the story. You knew the story you were going to get.
Right, but I mean, Romeo and Juliet, they tell you right in the beginning they're going to die in the end, and you're still like watching the play, like, what's going to happen? Don't drink the poison, screaming at the,
Yeah, and that's the tragedy story. So you have to build to that horrible end for the tragedy. And while each genre has its own specific structure, the 3-act structure is broad. The specific beats within that are going to be, genre specific.
Yeah. And we do have a couple minutes left, so I do want to kind of give a mention to other structures, because in horror and sci-fi and fantasy especially, the hero's journey is a big one that a lot of people hear about. So I don't know if you guys you probably all know a ton about the hero's journey. I feel like it's really well known, but do we want to discuss that one a little bit?
Well, I think because we've mentioned Star Wars already, Star Wars Episode 4 is the hero's journey. Like, that's what it is. So,
Well,
Right.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is the hero's journey can fit into a 3-act structure, a 4-act structure, a 5-act structure.
Yes.
But it's how do you develop the character? What are the archetypes you're dealing with, and what are the story tropes you're dealing with? And I mean, that's really what the hero's journey boils down to is no matter what the structure of no matter which story structure you use, the hero's journey is definitively what we look for in terms of human experience, because we're programmed to recognize, problem, conflict, solution. And that's really what the hero's journey is that is the most classical tale that we see. Even if you go back to Hercules, you go back to Greek myth, you go back to Sumerian myth, you go back to Beowulf, they're primarily a hero's journey. It's just sometimes the question becomes who is actually the hero of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the book is Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joe Campbell.
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If you're looking for a more detailed breakdown, but it's kind of that idea of it works really well for, sci-fi, fantasy, and horror because you have that very specific idea of crossing into a new world and then that return journey home. So if we look at like the Lord of the Rings, the whole overall, story is they leave, they go into this new magical world, all this stuff happens, they meet mentors, they meet allies, and then they end up with that return home, and that whole circle is the hero's journey.
Yeah, and
The Hobbit with the there and back again is like the perfect description for the hero's journey, because that's exactly what they do. They leave one way, come back changed.
And the mentor is really important for the hero's journey. You need that mentor figure.
Yeah, and if you want a book resource that's really good for writers about the hero's journey, it's called The Writer's Journey, Mythic Structure for Writers by Christopher Vogler, which walks you through the hero's journey, how that structure works. It also walks you through all the different archetypes, the hero, the villain, the mentor, the wizard, all those different roles and acts. So that's a really good resource.
I wonder if there's a good one for horror stories, because you have the different the different archetypes in the hero's journey, but for horror it works a little different. You don't exactly have like the wise old wizard as your mentor. It's usually like Ash with half his hand gone, and a chainsaw attached.
Well, then you're looking at more of an overcoming the monster style story, where the monster is going to be whatever your horror creature is, and the characters that are involved are either going to be a team trying to get through whatever the horror is, or it's going to be a who's going to last. So you have characters set up that are all going to end up failing at some point, but your hero is the one that remains at the end or who makes it through. Right.
But you have that entry into that like fantastical horror, supernatural, paranormal world where it's like we go to the cabin and now there's ghosts,
And again, this is one of those things where if you're trying to write this, go read books that have done it and watch the movies, because you're going to notice, oh, at this point in the story, this happens in all of them. Like, oh, that's when the first person dies. It's within the first, the inciting incident for horror. You're going to notice those things. You just have to know kind of what you're looking for. But if you sit down and watch 5 horror films in a row, I guarantee you're going to start to pick it up.
And you won't sleep that night, so you have plenty of time to write.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great tip, reading in your genre, but I think it's also really important to read outside of your genre, especially when it comes to things like subplots. So like, for me, reading a romance book will give me good ideas for like, how do I develop this relationship between my two characters, or do the will they, won't they for a little while? Like you learn different things from different genres. Like fantasy, you're going to be like, okay, how do I really do good world building? Like that's going to teach you a lot about world building. Whereas like sci-fi and historical fantasy or romance or whatever historical fiction you read will teach you about research and how important getting those little details woven into the story and not just like thrown in info dumps is. So you can really learn a lot by reading widely, as well as like reading in the specific genre you want to write. I think that's important.
I'd also like to add on to that we're talking about story structure, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, then everybody will know what my story is. But part of learning story structure is once you understand it, then you can start to innovate. And once you get to the point where you're looking to innovate, you definitely want to read wide and deep, because that's how you're going to have the ideas to innovate your specific genre, is by having this broader understanding of story.
Marissa just cued me perfectly. I was just going to mention that in a certain aspect, you don't always have to have the hero's journey be the central story. It can also be a subplot, i.e. the Princess Bride and Inigo Montoya. His journey was that was the subplot of the actual book, and the story in the movie. But it was the hero's journey because he was seeking revenge for his father.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
I'm actually rereading Princess Bride right now. I probably hadn't read it in 20 years.
You can subvert and change the idea as long as it stays within the structure, as Marissa so eloquently put it better than I did. But that's
example.
That's also a good example of character building, because each of the characters that are involved in that story is very defined. You know everything you need to know about those characters. You see that play out in their interactions between each other. And it's a classic. That one covers pretty much everything.
Goal, conflict, motivation.
Yes. I was going to say something. And also with the archetypes too, and the character archetypes and tropes and everything like that. Definitely make sure you're thinking about, how can I do this in a new way? How can I be innovative with this? Or how can I subvert this trope that's so common, and be like, well, you expect the mentor to be this wise old wizard, so I'm going to make him a 20-year-old pixie.
Yeah.
Now, subverting a expectation just to subvert an expectation also can piss readers off. You want it to feel right within the story.
Right. Everything that you do has to make sense, whether it's like character development. Do I have this chapter in the book? Or, do I have the character do this? Like, if it's out of character, or it's just to make something happen and it doesn't fit into your story or who the character is, of course, your readers aren't going to be happy about that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, but that's the biggest red flag that you don't have a real story, right? Is when you have to make stuff happen that doesn't really naturally flow within the story.
Oh my gosh. Well, when you were talking about like being able to predict movies, I know it's not a bad thing, but I just like immediately thought of this like MTV movie I watched with a friend, and I was like, oh, this is going to happen, and then they're going to do this, and oh, the witch is this person, and like, I was like naming everything like, a full minute before it happened, and they were like, did you see this before? And I was like, no.
All right, I'll give one specific example. When I was watching Dead to Me, the series Dead to Me with Christina Applegate and the gal from Freaks and Geeks, Linda Cardinelli, right? Well, when I was watching that show, the actual very first frame of that movie, of that series, I guessed exactly what was going to happen.
Right.
And the person that I was watching it with, she shall remain nameless, was testing me, and she stopped it, and she goes, okay, so you just told me you know everything. Tell me, because she had seen it before.
Tell me, right? Yeah,
tell me everything, and I told her to a T, and she goes, "Fuck you."
It's that writer, and like you come from a film background, so writing films, writing TV, and writing novels. So it's like having that writer brain. You can just figure.
and again, I will say that series is awesome.
Right.
It was a lot of fun to watch, and it was really cool, and it's well acted, well written, and I had no problem with knowing what was going to happen because it was like that, and right. So I can appreciate that aspect of it. It's just something that I can do. It's my stupid pet trick. I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
Let's not forget though too that sometimes achieving the tropes that are expected within your genre makes it satisfying, because readers, they do tend to read in the same genre because they know what to expect. It's their comfort zone for story.
Right.
And if you're following what their expectations are, you're writing to the market, you're still going to have a good story.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to develop the characters. I mean, because a lot of the time what you're reading for is what's the setup and how do the characters resolve it. You know what you're getting at the end of it. Depending on what it is, your lead character is going to come out, be the hero. The couple is going to be together in the end, whether it's happy forever, happy for now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you're reading for. The question is, how are you going to get there?
Anybody else have,
Huh?
I was going to say, anybody else have the urge to take out that clip that Jim just said and send it to J.J. Abrams on Twitter?
Please do. Was the first time I started to fight. But to me, the most important thing there is being aware of the medium you're on. And that's true, if you're comparing film to TV, to radio play, to novella, to novel, to whatever else, there's the similarity of story and structure, but how you get there and how the story is conveyed has differences. So one of the biggest things to learn how story is told from film and TV. Don't use that as your methodology when you're writing a book.
That's important, because you can learn about the structure side from film, especially if you're in the middle of something and you're struggling and you're like, I'm not sure what to do. You might be able to pick something up from a film, but you need to keep in mind that it is a film and you are writing a book.
Right. You don't have that visual. You don't have the music behind building up the emotional tone of the scene and all of that stuff in your novel. You've got to do it with your words.
Well, you might, but the reader doesn't.
Exactly. It might be in your head, but you got to put it on the page too. I say that a lot as an editor. It's amazing in your head. Yeah.
In the very beginning, that's where I think new authors kind of go overboard, is because they feel like they have to put so much more into it and be so wordy that they end up with the saggy middle because they're trying too hard. Mm-hmm. And that's where revisions need to come in and beta readers need to come in and tell them, hey, back off on this, cut some of this out, because your story is there, but you just put too much of it in.
Right. I feel like that comes down to like a description and imagination thing. Like story begins with the writer, but it ends with the reader. Like we leave some of it to their imagination so they can visualize it and see it in their head as how they want. So don't talk about the buttons on the dress. Please do not.
Reading and writing is a co-creation experience. The way that any reader is going to read your book is not going to be the same experience any other reader has. Obviously they're going on the same trip, the same journey, but how they see it, read it, interpret it, build the universe in their minds, what the character looks like, what the scenes look like. I mean, look at all the drama around Hermione Granger. Look at how everybody interprets how she looked. And, there's the stories about, should she have been white? Should she have been black? Should she have been something else? Because the description was descriptive enough that everyone had a picture in their minds until they saw her on film. And now that's what's fixed in your mind. At the end of the day, whoever is reading the book and whoever is reading the story is going to form opinions and ideas about the characters, about the scenes, about the environment, about the world building within their own framework. And I think that's the thing, is give people the tools to go build. Don't try to tell them everything that's in your head.
All right. I think this is a great time to let everyone know where we can find you. So we'll kind of go backwards and start with Jim this time. Where can we stalk you online?
You can find me at jamespnettles.com. You can find me at authoressentials.net. You can find me at continualconvention.com, mostly on Facebook. Occasionally I show up on the Hive and Scum and Villainy that is Twitter. In most places, I'm either James P. Nettles III or at James P. Nettles or JP Nettles author, or there's a few different IDs out there. Because again, physician, heal thyself. I tell people how to do these things, and then I don't do what I tell people to do. So other than that, the other thing I'll add is for everybody that's live is Dragon Con is of course going on this weekend. If you don't know what Dragon Con is, shame on you. But there are mentor sessions that are going on all weekend long for free. So if you go to dragoncon.org and look for the mentor sessions, There's still plenty of them available where you can meet with writers, editors, publishers in 15-minute segments and just sign up and go. I'm doing a few of them throughout the weekend, as well as a ton of other people.
Yes, let us know if you have anything to plug as well. So Marissa, where can we find you and what's kind of coming out for you next?
I'm just working on writing. You can find me at angelabreen.club. That's my fiction site. And then if you're looking for help with editing or anything like that, I'm at ravensquillpublishing.com. I do diagnostics, which is like I read your book from beginning to end, and then I give you kind of an overview of the structure and anything that's missing, stuff like that, ways that you can innovate, all that stuff. So yeah, if that's something you're interested in, check out ravensquillpublishing.com.
Sounds great. And Joe, you got anything you want to plug?
Yeah, we're starting our fall season starting Monday. And we're about to we're going to show you here in a minute what Monday is going to bring. But yeah, I mean, from actually we're really starting it Sunday, if you want to be honest, because we got This Week in Indies at noon Eastern. That's live as well, so come and check that out. We're going to be talking a little bit about a marketing. We're going to be talking about a marketing website that has come out. You know, it was out there for a bit, and now it's kind of trying to get itself out into the public, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that and on that show, and you'll get a actual little preview of what the schedule entails for the rest of the fall season on that show as well. So if you go and watch that show, you'll know what to expect that's coming up for us, and we're going to be doing a show virtually every day until Christmas. So
that's exciting. And Katie, where can we find you and what do you have coming up?
I'm super easy to find. Look me up by name, katiesalidas.com. That is your one-stop shop to find all of my social media, information about Spilling Ink, which runs every Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. I think it's 8 p.m. Eastern time. I suck at time zones. Where we interview authors every week and talk about how they do what they do and why they do what they do as far as their journeys in the publishing world. And I'm also a publishing consultant. So I help on all aspects of getting your book ready for market, everything but publishing. So manuscript critiquing, editing services, book formatting, interior layout, book covers. If you need it, give me a contact. You can also find me again, katiesalidas.com. All of my links are right there. Make it easy.
Wonderful. And I have a couple of things to plug, but you can find me. Hijinks Writer is my handle on pretty much everything. Hijinkswriter.com is my website. If you need any of my services, you can check them out there. Check out my books there. I actually have a book coming out on Thursday. Yay! So that's Half-Blood Alliance by J.K. Allen. And I'm very, very pumped about this series. So I'm super excited about that. And then as Joe hinted, on Monday, we have In Progress. And we did a little switch up with the schedule. So we will actually be talking about world building with Robert Cano. So, Joe, you want to? So join us Monday.
Do you want to say it or shall I?
I'll let you say it. You haven't said it in a while on the show. In the town halls anyway.
Well, everybody, just remember that it's always time to go indie now. And with that, we say good night.